My guest today is Dr. Robert Marbut, a fentanyl expert who has worked on issues of illicit drugs as well as homelessness for 4 decades. First as Chief of Staff to San Antonio Mayor Henry Cisneros, then as White House Fellow to President H.W. Bush, that's Bush 41 the father, and later as a San Antonio City Council person and Mayor Pro Tem, and as the founding president and CEO of Haven for Hope for 5 years, the most comprehensive homeless transformational center in the U.S. Now, he has also worked in 3 different U.S. presidential administrations, including serving as the executive director of the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness, often called the Federal Homelessness Czar. He is also the executive producer of the No Address movie starring Billy Baldwin, Beverly D'Angelo, Xander Berkeley, and Ashanti, highlighting the issues of homelessness. But today, we're talking about the fentanyl crisis. And since 2017, the skyrocketing misuse of fentanyl within the homelessness community has become the #1 homelessness sub-issue, with much of his daily work being focused on reducing fentanyl use, which led to the creation of his newest film documentary, The Powerful and Compelling Fentanyl Death Incorporated. So ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome our very esteemed guest today, Dr. Robert Marbut, to the show. Welcome back.
Well, thank you so much for having me again. It's an honor. And most importantly, thank you for caring about the fentanyl crisis in America.
Oh, absolutely. I've had friends and colleagues who have lost loved ones to fentanyl. But first, for the audience, exactly what is fentanyl and how did it become the most dangerous drug ever created?
Whoa, you have like 5 subtopics in that one question. And fentanyl is a what's called a synthetic opioid, and it was made in the laboratory, and it got developed and discovered, if you will, created in 1959, and it was used for very important medical procedures. Basically, and I don't want to sort of overstate it, but open heart transplants are almost are made available because of fentanyl when used properly. Because you had people who were dying on the table of shock, both pain and body, and fentanyl became the thing that paralyzes your chest cavity basically during surgery. That's what fentanyl is as a synthetic. And so it has been used very properly and very appropriately in a lot of medical use. But what happened was a lot of synthetic addiction to opioids start with the Purdue Pharma, as we all know about the Purdue Pharma. And when all and again, I'm going to simplify it, but the doctors were saying this is non-addictive. Take as much as you want; it'll be fine. And we all know about all the lawsuits and all that happened. Well, what happened was a lot of people who had medical surgeries like knee transplants, elbow surgeries, really painful surgeries, got addicted to the drugs that Purdue Pharma and others were putting out there. And when those all got pulled off the market about 10 to 15 years ago in all the lawsuits, the dangerous cartels of Mexico, I mean, they're insidious folks and do really horrible things, but they're smart businessmen. And they said, we got 1 million people already using these synthetic opioids. We have hundreds of thousands addicted people already. We have a built-in need. Let's just fulfill that supply. And so you can tie a direct line between the Purdue Pharma cases and the Mexican cartels in China as the first phase of fentanyl in America. And all the cartels did was come in and fulfill the supply chain that was built with addiction through Purdue Pharma. And that's how we get started. But why it's so powerful, you can't smell it, you can't taste it, and 2 grains of salt, just 2 little grains of salt equivalent of fentanyl will kill most people. 3 grains will kill everybody. Or 1/15 of a rice kernel will kill either you or I. It's so powerful.
Now, I understand that there are 4 common ways to die from fentanyl. What are they?
Wow, and this is sad. This is one of the things when I got into it, I had seen so much of it is the sort of street level addicted addict, if you will. And I don't want to call it recreational because in the world of homelessness, fentanyl is used to sort of numb your symptoms. It's self-medicating, but it is a illicit use or recreational use of drugs. So that's number one, and that's what a lot of people sort of focus on. But when we got deeper into it, we started seeing, and we have some just horrific stories in our documentary from moms in particular who have children dying 0 to 4. Think about this: children 0 to 4, one of the fastest growing death causes in America is fentanyl. And you're like, they're not calling up a drug dealer; that they are getting poisoned because it is so powerful. Fentanyl dust, if you will kill people. So if somebody had been using fentanyl on a park bench or a restaurant counter or a neighbor, family member, somebody they don't know, and they put it down on a counter, and then the child puts down a hamburger or something and pulls it back up, then suddenly they die that way. And then you also, in that same genre, you have a lot of fentanyl pills now that look like skillets, sort of these colorful pills. So children are just taking it thinking it's a candy. So poisoning of 0 to 4 children, which is just, to me, how did we get here? So that's number two. Number three is what's called lacing, and think Philadelphia right now, Kensington District. You read a lot about that, where they have a mix of fentanyl with horse tranquilizer, and so it's a 70-30 mix. It's called Trank on the Street, and that's a purposeful mixture. It's trying to, in essence, dilute the power of fentanyl, but still keep the high going with tranquilizers. Think about who should be using. No human should be using horse tranquilizer anyway. So you're mixing fentanyl and horse tranquilizer, and then there's a contamination effect that happens when you're taking a low end drug, and you end up where you're, weed or meth or something like that. And it was because the dealer on Thursday night was making fentanyl, and on Friday they were making weed or K2, and it cross contaminates. And in those cases, what we're starting to find is the dealers and the users don't even know it's in that drug. They're trying to get another drug, and they don't know that it's actually in that drug.
Wow. I mean, even the heartbreaking story in the film of the child in the park picked up a wrapper, didn't know that it had fentanyl on it, and died. And
And the stories are horrific. How this touches families. When we were setting up, you were talking about how you have friends and family, who know of people who have died. When I started seeing fentanyl on the street 5 years ago, I didn't know many people who had died. And in doing the movie, almost every single time I've sat at a table on the business aspects, when we're talking to the distributor or the filmmakers or people in Hollywood, they all then say, "Let me tell you a story about my niece. Let me tell you a story about my nephew," or in one case, a son. And you're like, this is, and it's because the magnitude of death is so. Think about this: that the stat that has really hit me the hardest, if you take all the people who have died in America with fentanyl through all four of those causes that we just went through, it is more than all military men and women in all 7 branches of uniformed service, plus the intelligence agencies who have died over the last 100 years of war for the United States. So that's World War II, Korea, Vietnam, Gulf War One, Gulf War Two, Afghanistan, Iraq, throw in a few UN operations, add all that up, it doesn't equal the death rate of fentanyl in the last 5 years in the United States. This is an existential threat to our country. Our country's on fire. And sadly, for the last 4 years, we haven't acted like our house is on fire.
yeah, the thing when I watched the documentary, I got to thinking, there's so many people out there that have allergies that walk around with an EpiPen. Are we all going to have to start getting Narcan and have Narcan in everybody's pocket?
Well, that's starting to happen. There's certain cities where Narcan is in every school. Narcan's in every public library. Narcan's carried by police, fire, EMS, and now they're handing it out. And that's a sad state of affairs. And Narcan is a medical tool to save a person, especially if it's a first time or that accidental poisoning of the 0 to 4 child. That's very, very important to do. I mean, that is just critical to do. But what I'm a little worried about is people are starting to think Narcan is the answer to fentanyl. And yes, it will reverse it once. But think about a person who has a heart attack or a stroke. One of the things we worry about is being brain dead after no pulse and no oxygenation. So they're not breathing, they don't have a pulse, so they're not getting oxygen to the brain. So brain damage occurs. We all understand that from heart attacks. And one of the biggest worries you have of heart attack and strokes is when they come back, how cognitive are they? How functional are they? And I know, and I've met people on the street now who've been hit with Narcan 30 plus times, and their functionality, that they're walking brain dead. They're literally walking dead. There's very little functionality of cognitive brain function. They're alive, and so I think we have to be very careful as we talk about Narcan to say, yes, it's a tool. Yet you do save a person's life, and I've been out with Billy Baldwin where we've seen people go dead, no breathing, no heart rate, hit him with Narcan. He and I were in Spokane, Washington, a few weeks ago, and we had a person go down, and they hit him with three different types of Narcan: the nose, an injection, and then another nose, and they finally got the person going. But this person was with no oxygen for 2 minutes at least, so you have to say how much damage occurs, and so we need to understand that Narcan is not a magic elixir to fix this problem. It will for an individual micro case that minute, but if you keep doing that, we're going to have zombies in our community. And in many places, think San Francisco, Philadelphia, you already have that.
Yeah, I saw this was probably about a year ago or so. I saw a video online where a police officer was standing in the lobby of a police station, and one of the officers across the hallway was looking at him, and then the officer didn't realize that he had fentanyl powder on his uniform, and he looked down and he didn't think about it. He went to wipe it. The officer across the hallway ran and tackled him to the ground to rip that uniform off of him so he wouldn't die. So it shows you that just even touching the powder, like you had said, can cause, put you in extreme danger. And you even show this in the documentary, which really scared me because I've heard stories about the possibility of the cartels, other countries using fentanyl as a biological weapon. And you show that in this film due to a Russian situation in which over 200 people died. Like you said, you can't smell it, you can't taste it. And if someone sprays this, you don't know it.
In that episode, a lot of people, you know, once you start piecing it together, a lot of this has been out there, but nobody's sort of put it all in a wrapper and put it together. And that's the issue where the Russian theater was overtaken, and their security services came up with the idea because they had about, I think, 1,000 hostages, about 30 bad actors, terrorists, and they pumped in fentanyl gas through the ceiling, and then because of the shootout that occurred, they weren't able to go in there and give the counter agents. They had a plan that they thought they would knock out 1,000 people. They'd send 100 people in, give them their version of Narcan, and recover. But because of the shootout went for an hour and a half, they weren't able to get the Narcan and the reversal agents, and most of the deaths that occurred were because of fentanyl. And most people haven't put all that together. And then you got like Little Peep and Tom Petty dying of fentanyl. And to me, I think one of the things we've got to start doing in the United States is be much more honest. And when you read the like Tom Petty, they talk about the glorious life, his great music, and I agree with all that. But I think it'd be much more useful in the first paragraph that says Tom Petty died of fentanyl, and it might give you more of a stop and go, if it could kill Tom Petty, it could kill me. And rather than sort of going through a 3 or 4 page biography and get to the bottom, and then it says, by the way, he passed away with fentanyl alone in his hotel room in Las Vegas. I think if we were much more honest about fentanyl death and about what's going on, I think that would help make people a little, and maybe we got to scare America. And this is a scary topic. I used to pick up trash all the time. I was one of those, I saw a rapper. I will not pick up anything on the street now unless I have gloves on. And sadly, that's because of what I've seen with fentanyl. And I've seen people just pick up something and then they touch their nose or put it in their mouth, or then they go touch a sandwich and put it in, and they go down and die. And this is a, we have never seen something so powerful, so is sort of engineered in the lab, that is so scary, lethal, potent, deadly, whatever you want to say. This is not K2. This is not spice. This is not crack or cocaine or black tar. This is 100 times more powerful than morphine, 50 times more powerful than heroin, and we got to act like that.
Well, as okay, I know with like morphine, you just can't go buy it at the pharmacy and take it home. And is fentanyl the same way? It's not a drug that you would bring home. I mean, because I know that with OxyContin, there were pill pushing doctors that would just write prescriptions, never look the other way, and that's how we went from OxyContin, and then until the government cracked down on it, now we're to fentanyl, and that span between OxyContin and fentanyl happened so very quickly.
And this has gone so fast, and I think that's why we need to get good basic education up so that every both we're individually informed, we're informed as families, but we're also policy change. And and so most of fentanyl is illicit fentanyl made with precursors from China, comes through the cartels of Mexico, but it's also very important to note that in the last 8 months in particular, I think they've taken down 24 super labs in Canada. And generally, a super lab is a lab that can produce 1 million pills. And so we almost have, my guess, and it's hard to know for sure because nobody's at the border counting it because they're trying to hide it. But I think we probably have more now coming through Canada than Mexico, and through the biker gangs of Canada. And we need to be way more attentive to our northern border, as well as all of our borders, our southwest border, the oceans. Um, Canada and U.S. have the longest border between any two countries in the world, and a lot of people forget that. It's not just Maine to Blaine, but you also have the border of Alaska and Canada, and so when you talk about a border like that, and we've really not paid attention to the northern border, and that's when President Trump brought this up shortly after our movie came out. The word got around about Canada, and then he had talked to Prime Minister Trudeau, who flew down to Mar-a-Lago, and the number one topic was fentanyl coming across the Canadian northern border. And so we need to be very careful about it. Now, on the medical one, I'll tell you, 20,000 of the deaths are medical misuse of fentanyl. And a lot of people are not aware you have these fentanyl patches that you put on for, in particular, like latter stage 4 cancer. And it's an incredibly useful improvement of quality of life for people who have cancer. Very important. Again, when fentanyl is medically used and properly supervised, it's very useful. But these patches, people are starting to like take from their relatives, their grandmother, their aunt, their parents, a sibling, and they take two or three patches and put two or three patches on one time when you're supposed to only put one patch on, and they're dying. And so we see people taking these medical patches and putting multiple on rather than the prescribed, and it's not for that person, and they're dying. And so we the ways to die through fentanyl are just, I don't want to call it unlimited, but we got to be very cognizant. Until we cut the supply, you have to assume everything you see on the street, drug of any type, including weed. And a lot of people say, well, weed is just not the same as the higher end drugs. But you're now seeing weed contaminated with fentanyl all across America now. And we have to pretend that everything, and not even pretend, I think you have to almost assume that everything you touch on the street now has some part of fentanyl. Not unlike it, we all remember the days in the 80s when most of the $100 bills in America had a trace of cocaine in them. It was a trace amount, but it was enough. Well, that same thing's happening now with fentanyl, but fentanyl is 10,000% more powerful than morphine, and we're not acting like that.
Yeah, the thing about this documentary, it opened up my eyes to see things in a whole new way. And you brought it up. Most Americans are only counting the southern border to Mexico and the northern border to Canada. They don't realize that we have the West Coast, the Gulf Coast, and the Atlantic Coast. Those are borders as well, and the cartels are using it, as well as China using it to their advantage, because I wasn't really stunned, but I also understand that every area of the United States is basically underpowered and undermanned. And that includes all the shipping containers that are coming into all of the ports, that only 1% are actually opened up and searched. I was shocked because I figured if you got to go through customs, everything has to be opened up.
And it's just not. And that's why, and I worry about this not just for fentanyl, but I worry about this in terrorism. I mean, part of my PhD is in radical Islam and Wahhabism, and I worry about people coming in and open, these containers that aren't open, and whether they're bringing people in illegally, or they're bringing terrorists in, or they're bringing in weapons of mass destruction. And at some point, I know there's some advocates who talk about fentanyl as a weapon of mass destruction, and it has killed more people than all those wars I mentioned earlier. And so at some point, we're not we're not thinking that way. We have to think of this as an existential threat to the United States that wasn't there 5 years ago. This has happened so fast. Part of
Well,
that is because of the distribution network that the cartels already had for other bad stuff, but some of it is just because of the potency and power of what fentanyl is.
yeah, let me ask you something, because you mentioned it, and I want to make sure I have my facts straight. President Trump has seen this documentary, and that's one of the reasons why I guess his eyes were even opened even more about the northern border.
The people around him have seen the documentary, I know of. I don't know if he has, but I know people around him have. And we have people in our documentary that President Trump's already tapped to come in and be, and which is really exciting, because that means we have some really thoughtful, smart folks going into the Trump administration that we've included. And we filmed this mostly during the summer, last summer. So this is long before the election. So we didn't know who was getting in. And what's really cool, we when we did our interviews, we would have like a foreign intelligence officer, a medical doctor, a forensic, a policy wonk, a family advocate who sadly had lost a family member, and maybe an anesthesiologist, all shooting in one day. And on the first day, we had some people coming in and overlap. They didn't want to be late. And they stayed through the rest of the day to watch the other interviews. And so all these people have a different piece of the fentanyl story that goes across. We're watching each other. And after we did that first day of shooting, our next several days we shot, we invited people the whole day. They started asking, these experts in all sorts of different disciplines started asking each other questions. So after myself and Stephen Woolworth, who is our great director and editor, we would turn to the people in our back and say, do you have any questions? And they asked some of the most thoughtful questions. And I'll tell you, to a T, they said, I thought my area of the fentanyl piece was sort of the whole story. And then they realized how much further and and part of it is because people are dying in so many different ways. It's not just street level narcotics, bad guys and drugs. That's part of the story, but it's not the whole story.
Are we looking at an impossible task to end this dangerous drug and those who sell it?
God, that's a great question. And you could watch our movie for the first half and start to get that feeling, but then when you start to watch the last half of our movie, I don't think you will. And I'll put up two different sort of data points on why I think we can be successful on this. Number one, in 1965, when I was 5 years old, 48% of America smoked cigarettes. Adults in America smoked cigarettes. Last year, it was 12%. And so we dropped adult cigarette smoking in America to 25. We cut 75% of it out. So we know how, with education, most important thing is to know this is bad. Let's be careful. Here are things you got to do. So that's one part of it. The other is, let's think about China, and we cover this a little bit in the movie. If you go back to the Opium Wars, China was one of the most addicted countries in the world with organic opioids, and they were fighting it. And it was Great Britain that kept trying to pump in the organic opioids, in the opium dens and all that. And they were trying to do it, and they had two wars about it, and Hong Kong was taken in order for Britain to be able to continue to put the opioids in China now. I spent 3 weeks, almost 3 weeks, as part of research for this movie. I went all over big cities, small cities, went to airports, public transportation, back alleys. I'd go all over. And I found only four people in my entire trip who were under the influence of anything. Two were alcohol, one looked to be meth, and only one looked to be fentanyl. And you can know fentanyl because it's called fentanyl bend. You literally bend down, and you because it paralyzes your chest cavity. So fentanyl people under the influence of fentanyl, you can really tell the difference. And I only saw one in all of China, and I probably passed hundreds of thousands of people and was looking. So if China can be so good at reducing their own internal use, I know that can be done in the United States. I also know that means China can do more. If they know how to stop it internally, they should also be able to stop it externally or exporting. The other is Mexico. Mexico has almost no fentanyl use, interesting enough. All because the cartels make it doesn't mean they use it. In fact, it's interesting when you see them making the batches. They wear respirators, they wear hazmat suits, and if you're putting something in your body that the producer is wearing a respirator and a hazmat suit, maybe we should be thinking a little more carefully about this. And so in Mexico, you don't see a lot of fentanyl recreational use at all, and you don't see any in China. And so, if those countries that are actually producing it know how to stop it, I think we can do it in the United States. And more importantly, we have to do it.
Yeah, we have to do it. And the thing about this documentary, and ladies and gentlemen, you have got to see Fentanyl Death Incorporated. It's a 1 hour documentary, and you're going to learn more than you could have ever even imagined in 60 minutes. And the thing, doctor, and you really kind of brought this up with China. China, in a way, is feeding this to us just like Britain was feeding opium to them back in the day. Now we're the ones that they want to weaken from the inside. It's a silent war. That's how countries play and that's how they work. But they're at the top of the food chain when it comes to fentanyl because they're not actually producing it, they're producing all of the ingredients. And then I learned through your documentary that if the US bans a particular ingredient, their labs just move a molecule over a couple of spaces, creates another precursor, you add it to making fentanyl. So it's like this never ending cycle. And so to me, China and even Mexico, they're the ones that are producing weapons of mass destruction in powder form.
Exactly. And the I think there's a lot to learn from opium wars, opium war 1 and 2 that occurred 150 years ago. And we saw how a country introduces it to another country. And back then it was Britain introducing it to China, and it was all about the money. And I think initially, it certainly with the cartels and with China, it was all about the money in the beginning. And then I think they started to realize not only can we get hard cash coming into our country, the American greenback is, still the staple of the world, but then they're like, hey, holy cow, we're bringing in greenbacks, but we're also destabilizing our adversary. And so I think it started with the money, and then over time, they realized we have a secondary benefit here because it's destabilizing our society. And I think you're touching on another issue that I think we have to also be honest about. We need to take out China's precursors and the precursors. We got to go after the cartels in Mexico. We have to go after the biker gangs up in Canada. We got to do all that. But we also need to be honest about our own country. Why is it United States since the 1980s, and you can go start with angel dust, PCP, coke, crack, black tar, K2 spice, meth, now organic opioids, and now synthetic opioids in the form of fentanyl. Why is it America consuming about 38% of the world's supply of fentanyl? We're consuming about a little over 1/3 of the fentanyl in the world now, illicitly. Yet we're only 4.25% of America. And or the world, America's world population is 4.25% of the population, yet we consume 38% of fentanyl. And if you look at all those illicit drugs I mentioned, we're an early adopter. We normally start out well above 50% in each of those drugs. And then it settles down to somewhere around 30 to 40% in pretty much every illicit drug there is. So if we're on an average consuming 1/3 of all illicit drugs of the world, no matter where time life the chain has been, why, and we're only 4.25% of the population, why is that? And we address that in our movie. We talk a lot about, we have sort of a one pill to solve all problems society. You got a pain in your knee, take something. You're upset, your child's not doing well in school, we give you another pill. And some of those are probably very properly administered, but some are probably excessive or unneeded, or maybe you need to go work out. Maybe you need to go play outside. Maybe you need to go do yoga. Maybe you need to do a relaxation or something alternatively. And then the other, and a lot of people don't like talk about this, and this was so strange. I mean, not strange. It was so, it really hit Stephen and I when we were editing and interviewing. We asked everybody sort of the king or queen question. If you're king or queen of the day, what would you do to address this? If you're a president or prime minister, what would you address this? And over half the people on their own said breakdown of the family. We didn't even ask about the family. And it was regardless of a medical doctor or an intelligence officer or DEA or an advocate. Every over half the folks came to the same conclusion that we need to, as one person in the film says, we need to eat together at the dinner table, put our cell phones down, listen to each other, really have fun at the dinner table, and have a good time at the dinner table and start talking. I'm a big Blue Bloods fan, and I love the fact that the Blue Bloods series was the key part of every part of the show was that family dinner table once a week on Sunday, and they all got together, and I thought that was so important. And we sort of nostalgically look at that as some time long time ago, and that's actually one of the antidotes to fentanyl is getting your family around the table, put your phones down, and have a family conversation, multi-generational. And I know that sounds cornball and silly, but it really is part of the solution as much as it is to go after China and Canada. And that's why we have that great quote from the president of Mexico, and and this is the former president. And when we made the movie, he was he was the president at the time, and he says very simply, if America overconsumes by 8 times your average population, I can take down one cartel, another cartel will pop up immediately to fulfill your desire of addiction in America. And that's coming from the Mexican president. And I know Prime Minister Trudeau said the similar thing to President Trump. So I think the solution is sort of all the above. We got to go after China. We got to have to go to Canada and Mexico. We got to go after the biker gangs and the cartels. We need to go after the street gangs that are starting to make it in the United States. But we also have to start looking at the sort of one pill solves everything mentality of Americans. But also, we need to start thinking about how do we rebuild our family units? How do we disconnect from cell phones and listen to each other and talk to each other over at dinner? And I know that's some people says, "Guy, you want to go back to the '50s?" I said, you know what? In the '50s, you didn't have fentanyl, you didn't have meth, you didn't have coke, crack. Maybe I am a little old school, but I really think that is part of the solution.
Well, it is. I mean, the only way to stop China and to stop Mexico and everything going on in Canada and coming into our border is to get everyone educated here. And if we stop doing the drugs, then they have no one to sell to. And
Exactly.
but you bring something up in this documentary that is probably one of the most important parts. We can do all these things out there, but the thing that people don't focus on is the recovery. What is harm reduction and why is it a myth?
Oh gosh, and we spend a good piece on this, and we also talked a little bit about this in our documentary that we did on homelessness. And harm reduction is this idea that says we know. I mean, I'm not saying I agree with this, but here's the theory. All right, you're a drug user, so therefore we're going to make the drug supply safe for you. So we're going to give you clean needles. We're going to give you a place to shoot up. In our homelessness movie, we showed a place that $28 million being spent a year by San Francisco City and County's medical department was providing a safe place to take fentanyl, safe place, harm reduction. And their idea was you come down there and we'll give you, in fact, taxpayers paid for all your peripherals, the straws, the foil, the needles, the Narcan, the nurses and such. And it says, come take these drugs here. That is such a myth. Fentanyl is too powerful. You can't make fentanyl safe to use. You can't make the fentanyl supply safe. Maybe you could do that for a low end drug like weed, but you cannot do this with fentanyl. And so, harm reduction, just as an illogical, it's saying, think about it. It says, we're going to still harm you, just our hope is to harm you less. And I still think that's crazy. And so, I would take every dime, every penny we have in harm reduction, and I'd put it in true recovery. And remember, most addiction starts with mental health. Not all, there's about 6, 7, 8% that it goes the other direction. But for most people, it starts with untreated mental illness. And in the 1950s, we had about a 500,000 funded federal beds in the American mental health system, about a 500,000. Right now, we only have about 20 to 25,000 mental health beds, and almost all those are forensic beds. Those are for people who were found innocent by reason of mental insanity, and so they're they're not free to go. They just, instead of going to jail, they go to a state hospital, if you will. That's about all we have left. And our country is 45, 50% bigger in terms of population, more people, and we have way less beds than we had. So where did people go? The streets, jails, and prisons. And there were people on the right who said we don't want to fund that. And there were people on the left who watched One Who Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and thought it was a documentary and then promoted deinstitutionalization. And so I think we need to have a real honest conversation about real treatment for mental health and need for proper therapy, which means we have to fund it. We need to not stigmatize it. We need to encourage it. And instead of saying, oh, we're going to still give you the same drug, but we think we can make it safer for you. And there is not a chance you can make fentanyl safer to take. It is too powerful. You can't make fentanyl safe. You can't make fentanyl supply safe. Yet, if you go to a lot of people in the harm reduction advocates, you go to their websites, they never mention treatment, they never mention recovery. They tell you how to do fentanyl. Like literally, the biggest thing they say, when you do fentanyl, do it with somebody else who's not doing fentanyl and make sure they have Narcan. I'm like, that's your answer?
Okay.
Is sit two people next to each other and make sure one of you doesn't take today, so you can
Okay.
Narcan the other person. That's their answer.
This goes back to the conversation that you and I had on homelessness. The perfect example is this. You always told us that if you see a homeless person, you are enabling them by giving them money or buying them food, which is a nice gesture, but you're keeping them homeless. This situation with harm reduction is the same way. The United States government, the states, and the cities are enabling the addicts on fentanyl. And if I remember this correctly out of the documentary, there was what, 1,000% increase in death when they implemented harm reduction.
Yes, and we had the head of the California Narcotics Association. We interviewed him, and they did a really interesting study because they kept saying harm reduction really works and such, and so they went up to Canada and they took all the names of the people that were in this harm reduction program. Then they went to the morgue and took all the people who had died and they lined the list up, and they found that everybody had eventually died with the drug use of fentanyl. And you're like, and it doesn't mean you died today or tomorrow, but you die shortly. When I started seeing fentanyl on the streets from when a person first took fentanyl and to when they died, and I it was 18 months. That's now shortened up a little bit. I have not met anybody on the street who started fentanyl, and it's amazing in the world of homeless people. They're very honest. They tell you what they're taking. They tell you when they started. That they're phenomenally honest. And I have yet to meet a person who said from first use of fentanyl to when I'm talking to them is more than 18 months. People are just dying with, and that's purely anecdotal, but it's thousands of people I've met or talked with or seen clinical reports with or worked with on the street. And I've asked everybody, like the nurse, technician, medicine, EMS, police, etc., and they all say the same thing. most of them will say they've not met anybody who's been over a year. And I've met a few people that's been 18 months. So once you think about that, so once you start fentanyl, you're going to be dead within 18 months, just statistically. And so, why aren't we acting like that? And this idea that we're going to be touchy feely and, well, when you're ready for treatment, we'll bring you in. You're going to be dead by then. We have to treat this. If we have this great lady, Amy, who's the chief of sort of alternative resourcing through the 911 system. I think the formal name is CARE. And she says, when you're jumping from one of Seattle bridges, and that apparently they have a lot of suicide attempts on bridges, she rolls lights and sirens and fire and EMS and police. That she sends everybody, and they have an incredible success rate of pulling people off the bridge. But when they pull them off, they don't say, "Oh, go do that another day." They bring you in and give you treatment and start working on what's that undercore issue that made you want to jump from the bridge. But with fentanyl, we go out and respond. We revive you with Narcan. And if you say you don't want treatment, we're not allowed to touch you. And I'm just mind boggled. If somebody put a gun to their head and said, "I'm going to kill myself," you EMS, police, fire grab you. They don't take the gun away and say, "Oh, you're okay. Oh, I don't want to kill myself anymore. Okay, carry on. Here's your gun back." We don't even, in most cases, don't even take the fentanyl away from you. In many West Coast cities, they let you keep the fentanyl on you. And I'm like, how did we get here?
Well, here's the thing about your documentary and why it is probably the best documentary about the fentanyl crisis is because you left no stone unturned here. And I mean, I learned so much in an hour about not just fentanyl, but how everything is connected. And then I looked back. You had that little clip of Reagan, and I still remember when the campaign, Nancy Reagan, the campaign, just say no, mid '80s, and here we are because uh, I think at that time, if I remember, there was a reduction in overall drug use because of the campaign. Kids, were told this over and over again in school. There were posters everywhere you walk down the hallway. You would see something that said, just say no to drugs. Now, and you brought something up in this documentary, and I went, yep, that's exactly right. Where the liberals who are running the courts, the DAs, the prosecutors, it's no longer a felony. It's a slap on the wrist. No one's going
It,
to prison for drugs, especially like this
and,
one.
and especially high end drugs, wholesalers and large retailers got to go to jail. We have to recriminalize heavy drug distribution because not only do we need to lock them up, we got to cut the supply down, but we also have to send a message that this is bad. There's a reason it's bad, and we don't do it. And we only hit this a little bit in the movie. When you put that much information, you try to get it all pressed into 30 minutes or 60 minutes of what we wanted to do. That's hard to do, but I wanted to spend more time. Why is it in California you can get a $250 fine for smoking a cigarette outside of a building? And I saw a person where the cops were called to give a person a $250 ticket. And if you're a repeat offender on cigarette, you can go up to almost $8,000 in fines in San Francisco of smoking cigarettes outside of a building. And then 2 blocks away from where I was watching this go down, the the city and county of San Francisco's mental health and behavioral health department is creating a safe area, quote, safe area, nothing safe about it, but a taxpayer funded for $28 million to go take fentanyl. And so the taxpayers are subsidizing fentanyl use blocks away from where I was and watching this guy getting a ticket for smoking a cigarette outside a building. And that's not the only city that has it. I mean, you can go to most cities and see don't smoke, don't do this. But then if it's fentanyl, they go, oh, sorry for you, let us help you get your supplies. I think we've lost common sense in this, and we got to get common sense put back into this as we address it. That's why we need to look at as America as much as we look at Canada, Mexico, and China. They're all important, and that's why on that poster we have all four flags, not three flags, in our poster.
Yeah, it's funny because, well, not funny, haha, but here we are allowing China and Mexico and Canada, but even within our own country, we're enabling the addict. We're not doing our job. And like you said, we need to start making these things as felonies. And again, track down the suppliers, get to as far up the chain of command and start taking everybody down. But overall, what can the general public do to help reverse the overall trend of fentanyl deaths?
I think you have to talk to your elected officials and say, we want to criminalize high end hard drugs immediately. And in most places, that is either literally recriminalizing it in the statutes and law, like California. Here's where I'm a little optimistic. A lot of, the presidential election took so much oxygen, and I get why that's important. But a lot of people don't realize the California citizens, not a conservative group of voters, they voted 2-1 to overturn the legislature to recriminalize high end drugs just 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago. That's exciting. These are citizens of California taking back their state and say, we're going to recriminalize it, even though the legislature didn't want to. Now, there are other places where it is on the statute and local DAs are not filing any charges. Police aren't taking, the amount of counter drug task force that we used to have is reduced in many states to 10% of what it was 25 years ago. We need more narcotics enforcement. We need to send bad people to jail. We need to send wholesale, high retail end people to jail. Wow, when you're an addict, we need to send you to treatment, not to jail. So if you're in the business of getting people addicted, you need to go to jail. And if you're a person addicted, you need to go get treatment. And every community in America can do that at a city level, county level, state level. And you can get your politicians and elected officials to start making that change tomorrow. And the fact that California reversed it on their referendum, they have initiative and referendum stronger than most parts of the country. This is the first time I've heard of the citizens rising up against their legislature and saying, we're not going to be nutty and stupid anymore. We are going to bring back common sense. And if California can bring back common sense, any state can bring back common sense.
Yeah, I think God gave us common sense for a reason. Now, Doctor, where can everyone see this incredible documentary, Fentanyl Death Incorporated?
Well, right now you can go to Salem Now, so it's like the city of Salem now, NOW, like right now.com. And you can watch it on your computer or your phone or your laptop and bring it up. And so right now it's in a pre-screening release phase that we have. And then Warner Brothers has picked it up for distribution first quarter of next year. So we'll probably be in a few theaters around the country, and then we'll be streaming, which is where most documentaries are picked up in the streaming world. But right now, today, whenever a person listens to you, watches you, you can go to Salem Now right now and .com on your computer phone and pull it up. And I would encourage, if you're a parent, if you are in that 18 to 48 group, this is the number one cause of death, or you're a policymaker, all three of those groups, this I think should be required to either come watch our movie, get educated on this, start to learn, And sadly, we have some emotional family stories of what this does to a family. We have several surviving family members talking about what it's like to lose a sibling. We have a very young lady in our documentary who lost two sons. Sorry, two brothers. She lost two of her siblings, and she went to go testify in Congress. And on the 6 month anniversary of one of her brothers dying, and then when they left, right when they left Capitol Hill, they found out a second sibling had died. So she lost two brothers 6 months apart, and you just like it's heartbreaking. But I'm optimistic. I think we can make a change. We've done it with cigarettes. China has done it with opium inside their own country and fentanyl in their own country. So, and I know if China can do it, we can do it, and we can get our act together and take down fentanyl ourselves.
Well, will this documentary be available to schools and churches and civic
We're
groups?
actually doing. We're working real hard now. We have a bunch of meetings set up. I'm going to a conference in a couple of weeks just to talk about that. And we have a goal that we would like every school, the junior high and high school, to play this. And we think we can. We have a way we can do that, and we're wanting to work with school districts. So we're starting to do that and get that information out because we think if it, I met. I was in Seattle meeting with a regional supervisor of DEA and a mom who had lost family members due to fentanyl, and they had just watched the documentary, and they said you can't scare kids, you can't lie to kids, but if you give kids just the facts, they'll make much better decision making. And if you also provide it in an entertaining way, we tried to make the documentary entertaining so you'll watch. And one of the incredible things we've seen in all the pre-screening, we can track a lot of this data, that when a person turns our movie on and they make it to the 1 minute mark, they make it to the 1 hour mark. Normally, when you watch a documentary, people like watch 20 minutes, come back another day, watch 20, another 20. Almost everybody who's watched the movie sits down, even if they think they're only going to watch 5 minutes, they watch the whole thing straight. And we're excited about how much information's in 60 minutes. And we spent a lot of time, Stephen and I, going back and forth on how do we get the right information that helps reduce deaths, which is our ultimate goal here.
Ladies and gentlemen, I have friends who have lost sons and daughters to fentanyl. The powerful and compelling film documentary Fentanyl, Death Incorporated provides an in-depth exploration of the fentanyl crisis, the most dangerous drug ever created, which has become the leading cause of death for Americans aged 18 to 45. Now, through interviews with international intelligence operatives, law enforcement officials, medical professionals, policymakers, and affected families, the film uncovers the unprecedented potency of fentanyl, which is 100 times more powerful than morphine. It examines the swift escalation in overdose deaths, the fastest in U.S. history, and highlights the global and domestic supply chains contributing to the epidemic. The documentary also addresses the failures of the current harm reduction strategies, the need for robust treatment solutions, and the profound impact on families and communities. Fentanyl, Death Incorporated is a crucial viewing experience that seeks to raise awareness and drive action against one of the most pressing public health crises of our time. Now, when you see this film, you will see that America has the largest number of drug users, a lax court system, and no system to encourage recovery or to protect our kids. Every parent should be able to see their kids grow up, but many are left with a granite headstone, a name, and 2 dates, because we are losing a war that goes way beyond just say no to drugs. We want to thank Dr. Marbut for the incredible film about fentanyl crisis, and I pray that this film makes a powerful impact in every community and that the new Trump administration will do more than the last 20 administrations combined. So, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.